I never planned to destroy 35 houses in one afternoon. It just sort of happened. The funny part?
They weren't even supposed to exist.
Not on my land, anyway. But when a homeowners association thinks you're too small to matter, well, you learn how big a dam can be when it breaks.
Literally.
That day started like any other quiet morning. Coffee, sunrise, and the view of my lake, the one my grandfather built by hand. Then I saw bulldozers. Not one, not two, 5 of them, rumbling like hungry locusts, flattening the North Ridge. My ridge. I thought I was hallucinating. So I called the county office, but the guy there laughed. "Oh, you're the old landowner from the Jenkins property, right? HOA's handling development now."
HOA.
3 letters that still taste like rust on my tongue. I drove down there, still in my slippers, and sure enough, there they were. Rows of people in hard hats, marking plots, hammering stakes like worker ants with clipboards. One of them, this smug guy in sunglasses, walked up and said, "Sir, this is a construction site. You can't be here." I said, "I live here." He gave me that pitying smile rich people use when they think you're a local ghost. "Not anymore, you don't. HOA purchased this subdivision last month." My heart went cold, because that couldn't be right. I own this land. Every inch, every tree, every rock, since 1983. Turns out, the HOA president, a man named Brad Withers, imagine a golf shirt with a human attached, had found a loophole. Some obscure property line adjustment from the 1970s was never refiled, so the HOA claimed the entire north section of my land was unregulated and ripe for community expansion. 35 luxury homes, each with a lakeside view. My lake. My damn lake. And I mean that literally, because sitting above that entire subdivision was the old Jenkins Dam, built to hold back enough water to fill the valley.
They never asked me about it.
They didn't even notice it. For weeks, I tried to fight it legally. Letters, calls, lawyers, the whole parade. Brad laughed at me during a zoning meeting. "Sir, we've already invested millions. Maybe you should be more careful with your paperwork next time." The crowd laughed. I remember staring at him and thinking, you don't even know what you're building under. Construction finished in 6 months. Families started moving in. They had lawn parties, boats, little white fences, all smiling for drone photos like a brochure for arrogance. And me? I was just the weird old guy who lived up the hill, watching silently from the porch of a house they called the eyesore. I'd become their villain without lifting a finger. But here's the thing. They built too close to the water. Every night, I'd hear the pumps running, draining my lake lower so their docks could stabilize. They were literally stealing my water now. And one night, as I watched the sunset fade behind the half-drained lake, something inside me just snapped. The dam wasn't big, maybe 40 feet high, but it was old, older than me, with a single steel gate controlling the flow. And when I realized how easy it would be to open that gate, my hands started trembling. It wasn't rage exactly. It was something quieter, like justice waiting too long to be called. I waited for rain. 3 days later, a storm rolled in, heavy and dark, like the sky wanted a front row seat. I stood at the gatehouse in my raincoat, flashlight in one hand, keys in the other. Down below, the HOA lights flickered through the mist, tiny, smug little stars. And then I turned the wheel. At first, nothing. Then a groan, deep as thunder. The gate shuddered, metal grinding against metal, and the water surged forward, slow, then faster, until it broke free. The roar that followed was biblical. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just stood there, watching 35 dream homes turn into driftwood under the storm. Somewhere, a siren screamed. Someone shouted my name through the rain. And as the water rushed past my boots, I felt a strange calm. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it was karma. But I knew one thing. Nobody would ever laugh at the old landowner again. But that was only the beginning. Because the next morning, when the news vans came, they didn't see a victim. They saw a suspect. What happened next turned my little act of revenge into something much bigger, something I never planned for. By morning the lake was gone. Just a muddy crater where water once shimmered and reflected the sky. Down below, chaos bloomed. The neat little rows of luxury homes now looked like a kid's toy set knocked over in the dirt. Roofs caved in, cars half sunk, and the once proud HOA president, Brad Withers, stood ankle-deep in brown sludge, shouting into his phone like he could order gravity to undo what happened. From my porch up the hill, I watched it all with a mug of coffee and a strange calm I hadn't felt in months.
It wasn't joy, exactly.
More like quiet justice, heavy and slow, the kind that makes you breathe deeper. Then I heard the sirens. 2 sheriff's trucks and one of those news vans with a satellite dish came grinding up the muddy road toward me. I didn't bother running. Where would I go? I'd lived here half my life. There were no secrets left to hide. The first deputy out of the truck had that look, tired, annoyed, and half awake. "You the owner?" he asked. I nodded. "We're gonna need a statement. Folks down there say you might have opened something you shouldn't have." He didn't sound convinced himself.
Just doing his job.
Brad, on the other hand, was fully convinced. He charged up the hill like an angry mall manager, mud splashing up his khakis. "You lunatic. You destroyed everything. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I sipped my coffee and said, "Looks like I fixed the drainage problem." Even the deputy tried not to laugh. Brad didn't find it funny. He jabbed a shaking finger at me and screamed something about lawsuits and criminal charges and property destruction. I asked him if he wanted a towel.
He didn't.
They took me in for questioning, of course. The station smelled like coffee and wet paperwork. The detective, an older guy named Reynolds, looked at me across the table and sighed. "You know, if you did this, you're in deep trouble." I said, "If?" He raised an eyebrow. I leaned forward and said, "Detective, before you accuse me of anything, maybe you should ask why those houses were there in the first place." That got his attention. I slid a folder across the table, copies of the land records, the survey maps, the original deeds signed by my grandfather. They built on stolen land.
Mine.
The dam was never part of their construction plan. They didn't even have permits to touch the lake. He took a long look at the papers, scratching his chin. "So, you're saying the HOA was in the wrong?" "I'm saying," I told him, "they didn't respect boundaries. I just reminded them what happens when you cross one." While I waited in the holding room, the news started spreading. Lakeview subdivision destroyed by sudden flood. Reporters loved that phrase. Sudden flood. Like it was nature's tantrum, not mine. By noon, social media had already decided I was either a folk hero or a maniac. Half the comments were cheering me on. The other half wanted me jailed for life. People love a story when they don't have to live it. They released me that evening. No charges yet, just ongoing investigation. I drove back home through the wreckage. The sun was setting behind the valley, and everything glowed gold and ruined. Some of the new homeowners were standing around in disbelief, still clutching their HOA flyers like they could wish the words back into houses. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. They were victims of Brad's arrogance more than mine. He'd promised them exclusive lakefront living. Now they had front-row seats to a swamp. A week later, a lawyer came knocking. Not mine, Brad's. He handed me a stack of papers thick enough to choke a horse. Lawsuit. Damages. Negligence. You name it. The man barely looked at me. "Mr. Jenkins, you are hereby served." I said, "Tell Brad I charge extra for landscaping." He didn't laugh. But something strange happened after that. People started showing up, not cops, not reporters, just locals. Farmers, old neighbors, even some folks from town I hadn't seen in years. They came up to shake my hand, leave pies, say things like, "About time someone stood up to those HOA bullies." One man even brought me a t-shirt that said, "The Dam Avenger." It was ridiculous, but it made me grin. Word got around fast that the HOA had built illegally. County inspectors suddenly rediscovered their conscience. Brad's company got slapped with fines for unauthorized development. The lawsuit began to crumble before it even started. Still, victory never feels clean. I couldn't sleep at night. Every time it rained, I'd wake up thinking the water was coming for me this time. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, or maybe the quiet was just too loud after all that noise. Then, 3 weeks later, A letter arrived, no return address, just my name scrawled in blue ink. Inside was a single photo. My house, taken from the woods at night. On the back, 2 words. Your turn. That's when I realized this wasn't over. The HOA might have lost their homes, but someone out there wanted payback. What would you have done if you were me? And before we get to what came next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me, was I wrong to open that dam, or did they have it coming? The photo sat on my kitchen table for hours, the ink starting to curl from the damp air. Your turn. 2 words, but they felt heavy enough to tilt the room. I kept looking toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing out there in the tree line, watching. I'd lived on that land for 40 years. I knew every rustle, every creak. But that night, the forest didn't sound like home. It sounded like it was holding its breath. The sheriff came out after I called, though he didn't seem thrilled about the drive. He held the photo under his flashlight and muttered, "Could be a prank." I said, "People don't drive out in the rain just to pull a prank on an old man." He shrugged. "Maybe you should stay with someone in town for a few days." I told him, "This is my land. They've already taken enough." He nodded, pocketed his pen, and drove off into the dark. His taillights vanished, and I was alone again with the frogs and the wind. By morning, I decided to install cameras. Cheap ones from the hardware store, nothing fancy. I put one facing the dam, one toward the driveway, and one on the porch. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been close, too close. Maybe I should have left it alone, but I couldn't. That afternoon, I hiked down toward the ruins of the subdivision just to see how bad things really were. The mud had hardened into cracked veins, broken wood still sticking up like ribs. The smell of damp concrete hung in the air. In the middle of it all, I saw a single blue tarp, weighted with rocks. Underneath, someone had laid flowers. White lilies.
Brad.
He'd lost more than his houses. His brother-in-law had drowned the night of the flood.
I didn't know that part.
Maybe I should have guessed, but when you're angry long enough, you stop seeing people and start seeing enemies. Guilt hit me like a punch in the ribs. I turned to leave, but then I heard it, a soft snap of twigs behind me. I froze. Nothing but the wind, I told myself. I started walking faster, but then I heard it again, closer this time. When I turned, there was just movement between the trees, fast and low. No one should have been out there. I made it back to the truck, locked the doors, and didn't breathe easy until I saw the road again. That night, the cameras caught something. I woke to the alert on my phone, 2:14 a.m., movement near the dam. I pulled the footage. The grainy image showed a figure in a hooded raincoat, flashlight flickering. The person knelt by the gate controls, then looked up toward my house before walking away. No license plate, no clear face. Just the storm and the sound of water dripping. I called the sheriff again, sent the video, but he just sighed. Can't make out much. Probably kids. I told him kids don't sneak out to tamper with floodgates. He said he'd file a report, though his tone said he wouldn't. I decided to sleep in the truck that night, shotgun across my lap, parked by the dam. The rain came steady, and my eyelids grew heavy. Around 4, I heard a splash. My flashlight beam caught the ripples spreading wide, but whatever caused them was already gone. The next morning, I noticed something worse. The lock on the dam gatehouse had been cut clean through. I followed the muddy footprints leading down the slope to the road, but they vanished halfway. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Brad wouldn't come himself, not after what happened. But someone loyal might. Someone with a grudge and time to plan. I started calling around, asking about Brad's case, trying to see if he'd said anything strange. Most people hung up or said they didn't want trouble. One old neighbor finally whispered, "He's been quiet since the flood, but folks say he's hiring people to dig up dirt on you." Said you still owe him. That phrase, "owe him," stuck in my head. What could I possibly owe a man who took everything? The next few days blurred together. Every knock on the door made me flinch. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Then, just when I started to think I'd imagined it all, another letter came. This time, no photo. Just a map. My property line, circled in red, with a big X drawn over the dam. No words. Just that. I don't scare easily. But something about that X, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Someone planned to finish what I started. Maybe destroy the dam completely. Maybe worse. I had two choices. Tell the sheriff again and be ignored, or handle it myself. And after what they'd already done, I think you know which one I picked. Would you have called for help, or done what I did next? If you want to see how far this went, make sure you like, subscribe, and tell me below, how far is too far when the fight comes to your own land? The night before it happened, the air felt too still. No crickets, no frogs, not even the hum of the wind through the pines. It was the kind of silence that warns you something's about to break. I hadn't slept in 2 days, my mind replaying every threat, every shadow at the edge of the woods. I sat on the porch with a lantern, the shotgun leaning against my knee, waiting for a sound that might not come. But around midnight, I saw headlights, slow, careful, creeping along the dirt road that led to the dam. I cut my porch light and watched. The truck stopped by the gatehouse. 2 doors opened. Flashlights flickered, beams slicing through the mist. My chest went tight. They weren't kids. The way they moved, cautious, deliberate, they were here for something. I grabbed my coat and started down the hill, sticking close to the trees. The moon slipped behind a cloud, and for a moment, everything went black. That's when I heard the first clang of metal, the sound of the gate mechanism being pried open. By the time I reached the dam, they had tools out. One man was crouched by the wheel, the other keeping lookout. I stepped from the shadows and racked the shotgun. The sound echoed like thunder. "Step away," I said. The one by the wheel froze, but the lookout turned his light on me, blinding me for a second. I fired a warning shot into the air. They both bolted toward the truck. I ran after them, slipping on the wet concrete. The engine roared, tires spun mud, and the truck tore off into the trees. I caught just enough of the plate to know it was covered with tape. I stood there, soaked and shaking, as the rain started to fall again. The dam's gate was half loosened, just hanging there. If I hadn't come when I did, another surge could have taken the whole valley. I tightened the wheel back down and chained it with a lock so thick even a blowtorch would take time. But I knew this wasn't random anymore. They were serious. This was no longer about houses or lawsuits. This was personal. The next morning I went to town. Everyone stared like I was a ghost. At the diner, conversation stopped when I walked in. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee. The waitress poured it without a word. Then she leaned in, voice low. "You should watch your back. Brad's been asking questions about your routines, your habits, your schedule." I said, "How do you know that?" She nodded toward the corner booth. "Because he's sitting right there." I turned and sure enough, there he was. Clean shirt, sunglasses, and that same smug calm he wore the first day he stole my land. But this time, something was off. His hand trembled around the cup. I walked over and said, "You could have called instead of sending people to vandalize my dam." He didn't flinch, just smiled. "You've made quite a name for yourself, old man. People love you online. Folk hero, environmental crusader, the works. But fame doesn't last. Evidence does." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, me by the dam, the gate open, water pouring out. Grainy, sure, but clear enough. "You think the sheriff's on your side?" he said. "Think again." He stood up to leave, but I caught his sleeve. "You set me up." He leaned close enough for me to smell the aftershave.
No.
"I'm just making sure the world knows who you really are." Then he walked out, calm as ever. I opened the folder again. Every photo was time-stamped from the night of the flood. Except I hadn't taken any. Someone had followed me that night. Someone had watched the whole thing. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my truck outside the diner, staring at those photos. There was no way to prove they weren't mine. If Brad handed those over to the county or the press, I'd go from folk hero to criminal overnight. Maybe that was his plan all along, erase the HOA's failure by turning me into the villain again. I drove home slowly, the gravel crunching under the tires, mind racing through every possible move. When I got back, I noticed the front door open. Just a crack, swaying in the wind. My stomach dropped.
I hadn't left it that way.
I stepped inside, shotgun raised, heart pounding. The place was a mess, drawers open, papers scattered. But nothing was taken. Whoever it was hadn't come for things. They'd come for me. On the wall above the fireplace, carved into the wood with something sharp, were 3 words. Next flood's yours. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I packed a bag, loaded the truck, and parked it by the barn. If they wanted a flood, I'd give them one they wouldn't forget. But this time on my terms. Because I realized something in that moment. They thought I was predictable. They thought I'd just defend what was left. They didn't understand that when you take everything from a man who's already lost, you don't leave him cautious. You leave him dangerous. So I waited for the next storm, the one already building on the horizon. Would you have stayed and fought, or vanished before the next wave hit? And before we dive into how it all ended, make sure you like, subscribe, and tell me, what would you do if the flood came for you? The storm came harder than any I'd seen in years. The kind that shakes windows, turns the world into a sheet of noise, and makes you wonder what's holding everything together. I stood in the gatehouse, rain hammering the roof like fists. The water level was already high enough to lick the bottom of the dam's spillway. This was it, the storm I'd been waiting for. Or maybe the one they'd been waiting for me to make a mistake in. My cameras had gone out an hour earlier.
Static.
No feed. Either lightning fried them, or someone had. I'd stopped believing in coincidences weeks ago. I watched the gauges rise, half an inch, then another, then another. The gate rattled against its hinges. The ground itself seemed to tremble. I could smell the mud shifting, the wet bark of trees bending in the wind. And then, through the rain, headlights again. This time 3 vehicles, not one. They parked by the lower access road, engines idling. I counted 4 silhouettes, all in rain gear. One of them carried something long, a crowbar, or maybe a rifle. My hand went to the shotgun beside me, and for a moment, I almost walked out to meet them. But then I saw the reflection of flashing red and blue lights in the puddles behind them. Sheriff's cruisers. Brad had called them. He'd finally done it. Within minutes, the sheriff's voice came through a bullhorn. John Jenkins. Step away from the dam. Hands where we can see them. I felt a strange calm, like déjà vu wearing a new coat. He thought I was going to flood the valley again. Maybe Brad had told him that I'd planned another release. Maybe he'd shown those doctored photos. I grabbed my coat and walked out slowly, hands raised, rain streaming down my face. They surrounded me, flashlights bright as small suns. Sheriff Reynolds stepped forward, his face hard. We got a call you were tampering with the dam again. People say you threatened another flood. I looked him in the eye. I didn't touch it. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, quieter, you need to come with us. But before he could finish, one of the deputies shouted from the ridge. Sheriff. The gate's opening. Everyone turned. The metal wheel was spinning on its own fast. Too fast. Water surged through the cracks, spraying white foam. Reynolds ran to the controls, trying to stop it, but the lever wouldn't hold. Someone had cut the hydraulic line. The gate screeched as it dropped another inch. I ran toward it, shouting, "It's not me. Someone sabotaged it." But no one was listening. The sound was deafening. The dam groaned under the force of the water. I could feel it, like a living thing bucking against its restraints. And then I saw movement in the shadows below, a figure in a rain hood, crouched by the lower pipeworks, wrench in hand. I recognized the shape, the way he moved.
Brad.
He was trying to force the gate open completely. I didn't think. I just ran. Down the slick steps, across the platform, through the spray. My boots slipped on the wet metal, but I caught the railing just in time. Brad saw me coming and yelled something I couldn't hear. I lunged, grabbed the wrench, and we both went down in the mud, wrestling in the roar of the water. He was stronger than I expected. Years of shaking hands at HOA meetings hadn't made him soft. He landed a punch that split my lip. I shoved him back against the railing. The wrench clanged over the edge, disappearing into the foam. Why? I shouted. You'll drown us both. He spat mud and said, You took everything from me. I said, You took it first. And then, like the universe wanted an exclamation point, a crack split the air. The dam's foundation gave way. One side buckled, stone and concrete collapsing like a throat clearing itself. The force threw us both backward. I hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of me. Brad didn't move. I crawled toward him, the water rising around us. His eyes were open, glassy.
He was gone before I could speak.
I grabbed the railing and pulled myself up, chest burning, and climbed toward the stairs as the water tore through what was left of the gate. The roar followed me up the hill, chasing me like thunder that could bleed. When I finally made it to the top, the entire valley was a storm-swollen river again. Houses, what was left of them, crumbled like sandcastles. Police lights flashed uselessly against the rain. And me? I just stood there, soaked and hollow, watching everything wash away again, same as before. By morning, the storm had passed. They found me sitting by the ruins, wrapped in a blanket, hands raw from climbing. No one said much. They didn't need to. The story wrote itself. Old man, mad with guilt, floods the valley twice. I told them the truth, of course, that Brad did it. But truth doesn't always survive the current. Weeks later, I stood by what remained of the dam, a pile of stone and twisted metal, and thought about my grandfather. He built that wall to hold back the world. Maybe I was never meant to keep it standing. Maybe some things need to break, so the lies can finally wash away. That was the last time I saw the lake. I moved into town, far from the valley. Sometimes people still stop me in the grocery store, whispering, You're that damn guy, right? I just nod. Let them believe whatever version makes sense. I've stopped trying to fix stories that other people flood for me. So tell me, was I the villain they said I was, or just the only one willing to open the gate? And if you've stayed with me this far, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me below, what would you have done if the whole valley was built on your land?